So we are here to talk today about transformation at an enterprise level. And for a very first thing, I'd like to ask you guys to indulge me in doing just a really quick little exercise. So everybody has to actually look up at me. So super quickly, we're only going to take a minute or two to do it. I want you to change seats with someone in the room. All right? On your marks, get set, go. 1 minute. Ermi, that doesn't count. I noticed this over here. She tried to cheat.
Nobody wants to sit in the front.
I know, right?
You can change back after.
True, I'll let you change back. You're right. So, all right. So why did I have you guys do that? Let me first tell you a couple of my observations. So first of all, I think there were some people who were like, okay, cool, fine, whatever, I'll change seats. There were some of you who were like, I'm not super happy about this. I actually had a really great seat on the side, and I was going to leave if you got super boring. I was going to fake like I had a phone call and run off, and now I can't do that. So you messed that up for me. So my point in doing this is to remind us that at the end of the day, we're humans, and we actually don't really love to change. And what we did was just actually a very super simple change. All I did was ask you to switch seats. And truthfully, probably a lot of people in the room were probably fairly early on the adoption curve when it comes to a lot of change. We're probably people who tend to get technology sooner and are actually fairly comfortable with these kind of things. But we still didn't love it, right? So think about it, and I just asked you to kind of keep that lens as we talk. Think about it from the standpoint of enterprise transformation. You know, when we really start to go down that path, we're talking and we're asking people to change their jobs. We're asking them to potentially work in very different environments. We're actually maybe looking at rewards and incentives, and we're actually aligning those in a way that's very different than probably they've had for their whole careers. That's a really difficult thing. And it was funny, just to give you guys an example, yesterday we were kicking off with a new client, and I was just getting a little bit of background and talking to them. And they started doing some work about a year ago to actually sort of change their physical space to enable more collaboration. So, moving kind of down the path to what it looks like, here in an office like this. And there was actually an effort started, a ground roots effort called Save the Cube. So they wanted to save their cubicles, right? And I think all of us would think, I don't want to save any cube I have ever. Personally, I would not want to save any cube I've ever been in because they were actually kind of all horror shows. But just to remind, to give us that perspective that, people don't like to change. And even though it isn't necessarily that they love their cube so much, that they were concerned about where they were going, right? So in terms of transformation, so technology is providing us incredible opportunities to transform enterprises. Really, really amazing time. But if you want transformation to be sustainable and successful over time, you have to really look at the people and the processes in concert, or you're not going to end up being successful. So another quick example, how many people in the room actually in the last, let's say, year have purchased some sort of wearable device to actually help improve your health? So Fitbit, Apple Watch, nobody? Really? Okay, Fitbit, Apple Watch, Garmin. All right, so of you guys, how many of you reached the goals that you wanted to? A little fewer. And a couple who maybe felt peer pressure to raise their hand because other people were raising their hands, right? So this is another example of the technology in and of itself, right? It doesn't do it. You can't meet your health goals if you're only saying, oh, it's super cool, I have this Fitbit, I'm going to walk however many steps, and I'm really, really happy about that. And then, the newness kind of wears off a little bit over time, right? And you're like, okay, well, I forgot to put it on for 4 days in a row, whatever. But it's really about those behavioral changes. I actually have to watch what I eat. So I have a bad habit of, I travel a lot, so one of my bad habits is, when I'm flying back home for the last flight of the week is that I run to the candy store at whatever airport I'm in. Probably can't do that if I want to reach these wellness goals, right? So, the nutrition, you have to actually sleep more, you have to manage your stress. All those kind of practices and behaviors as a person have to really align with that technology if you're going to get where you're going from a transformation perspective, okay? So, let's talk a little bit about what transformation looks like and some of the things that we see as we work with organizations. So one of the key things that we see a lot is, you go, and this is organized as a from too, but technology as either an undercurrent or as a cost center, right? People tend to think, IT, that's something that we have to have. versus technology as a core of the organization. Or really, more and more you hear companies talk about themselves now as technology companies, regardless of what their business is and regardless of how they actually interact with their customers. They realize that technology is, core and central to what they're trying to accomplish. Shareholder value, which has been for a very long time the focus, but really trying to get people to understand that the focus ultimately also has to be very much on the customer and the employee experience. Silos and isolation to cross-functional ownership. So as another example, a client I was at last week, a major retail firm, and I was talking with them last week, and they had started a cross-functional team, and it's one of the things that we really believe is super important for a transformation effort, is that you have a cross-functional team both at a leadership level and at sort of a day in and day out working level in order to achieve what you're trying to do. And they were like, oh, this is great, we have a cross-functional team. I go, awesome. So let's talk about who's on it. And they said, well, people within the app dev space. And I said, okay, that's great, but that's not exactly what we're talking about when we talk about cross-functional. They didn't have the full IT organization. They had a slice of IT, and then they didn't have the business, they didn't have HR, they didn't have finance, they didn't have any of these other pieces. So cross-functional leadership, again, if you want a transformation to be sustainable and if you want it to be broader than just, we're changing the way that we deliver a couple of products from a software standpoint, you really have to look at making it cross-functional. Manage control of teams, self-organizing teams. So this is a huge cultural shift with most enterprises that we work with. They're very used to having a structure that tells them what to do and then liberty within that framework to talk about it, but very focused on this is how you do it, as opposed to this is where we're trying to go figure out how to do it. Very different mindsets. Planning and execution to learning and adapting. So very much something you see in terms of software development. Is the project green, red, or yellow? Is the budget green, red, or yellow? These kinds of things that have been very traditional mechanisms versus, this is the output we got this week. And we learned a few things. We didn't exactly go where we thought we were going to, but we learned all these other things. And because of those things we learned, this is going to be a much higher quality product that the customer needs. It's a different way of talking, and it's a different way of showing output. I won't go through every single one of these. A couple of the others I want to highlight, which we just talked a little about, this one in the context, was the top-down directives versus leadership and storytelling. So in fairness, this from to is a little bit binary because you do need both. When you undertake a transformation, you do need leadership to tell you, this is the vision and this is where we're going and what success looks like, really. But what we find is most compelling is actually the stories that individuals tell when they go through that journey. So we've had a couple of, again with the major retail client that I was mentioning earlier, we have a team of folks from Atlanta that are working with one of our offices in New York. And when some of those folks first came up and they saw the environment and pairing from a programming standpoint, all these different kinds of approaches, they were like, that's not me. That's not how I work. Not comfortable with that. Wow, that's not going to be super fun. So throughout that process of working with them, there was really an amazing mini transformation of those individuals as they started to see the value of working in different ways. And we've actually really encouraged them to blog and to talk about it, because that ultimately is super compelling, as opposed to, well, the CEO said we're going to do it that way. It's like, what was your experience? How did you interact with it? What did you learn? What did you like? What did you not like? So it's not propaganda, right? It's really telling the experience and telling the story, which we think is super important. Managing risk through prediction, managing risk through smallification, which probably isn't really technically a word, but we really believe transformation is a series of small changes that ultimately add up to bigger changes, and by doing those small changes, you end up with other opportunities that you didn't expect to have. So anybody seen the movie The Martian? Okay, then I won't completely ruin it, because I am going to kind of ruin it just a teeny bit by saying that he lives. So if you didn't know that, I'm super sorry. Don't go see the movie, but he does live, okay? So, but at the very end of it, he's talking about, how did you make it through this you're left on Mars by yourself. How did you make it through that? And the way he talks about it, and it really resonated with me, was, I solved one small problem at a time. And by solving that first problem, and then the second one, and then the third one, I sort of realized, oh, okay, now I can actually start to do some other things. So, he knew where his vision was. Obviously, he wanted to live. He wanted to get back to Earth. But he didn't worry about what are every single step that I'm going to take to get there. He started solving problems at a time. And that's really very applicable to enterprise transformation. All right. So, myths and truths about transformation. So, one of the myths that we hear, and actually I think a lot of the clients that I work with, many start in the place of, it's just IT. I just want to transform IT. And if I just do IT, everything's fine. But IT doesn't live by itself on an island, right? So without needing to interact with any other parts of the organization. So, IT to function, to do products, you need funding, right? So a lot of funding processes are very tailored to waterfall development approaches, because they're used to, okay, I'll give you this much money, you get this far, this is my stage gate, I'll give you this much money, you go a little bit farther, I'll give you this much more, etc. So, they might need to be involved if you're actually going to change to more of an agile development process and really leverage digital technology, right? Same thing, HR certainly needs to, because you're really looking at roles, you're looking at rewards and systems, because previously you may have rewarded people for their individual goals, which is what we find a lot, versus now I'm asking you to work in a team, and I'm asking you to commit to a team goal, and that really impacts a lot of things. It also impacts how you recruit. Very different, potentially sets of skills, or how you educate, because you want to be able to help people skill up so that they can move to take on some different roles and responsibilities, which are engaging and interesting for them to also make these changes. So it's really a team sport. It involves all parts of the company. So the other one that we hear, and actually, I wonder how many of you guys perceive this too, that transformation is about, we just want to get to market faster. Anybody? Is that what you guys hear in terms of, yeah. So frequently, when we start conversations with clients, that's what we hear. You know what, we want to transform because we need to get to market faster. And we say, great. I mean, because speed to market is important, right? But why? Why do you want to get to market faster? Well, because our competitors get to market fast. Okay, great. Well, why does that matter? What are they trying to accomplish? What's different? And as you peel back the onion, and again, I'm not blowing off speed to market because it is important and it is very relevant, but when you really start to peel back that onion about what drives a transformation, it's really about the customer, right? It's how are you ultimately satisfying that customer? And speed may be a piece of that, but it's also understanding their needs. It's making sure you're building the right thing for them, and you're putting it out in a place that they need it and that they want to consume it, right? So what the right platform is, et cetera. So it's really important to understand and to be crisp about what you're trying to accomplish with a transformation, so that it isn't just speed to market, speed to market. Another one that it's funny, we hear a lot too, is, as a big enterprise, we're too complicated. Can't do it. Too complicated. Too unique, too different. And again, I'll talk about a couple of conversations I had last week that were at this retail client that we have. And we started talking to them about, or they started talking about, what are the barriers that are getting in the way of being able to transform. And over again, it came to, we're really complicated. Well, because we have this structure and we have all these pieces, and so that'll never work. And so finally, I said, you know what, it sounds like we're super focused on obstacles, and we're not actually thinking about how we can leverage opportunities within the context of those. We're just saying, oh, there's an obstacle, so I'm going to stop. So, and agile methodologies really enable us to simplify things, right? To take on a piece of the problem and solve that and move to the next one, as opposed to thinking, okay, I've got to look at this whole thing all at once and do everything. So this actually dovetails into the next one too, that transformation requires we make big sweeping changes. It's not. It's a series of small changes over time that create a difference. And then the last one is, the people who try this and fail have limited their careers. So, and I don't know to what extent you guys have heard this kind of thing, but this one really needs to be about an organization that is focused on learning and that realizes that transformation isn't only about success. Transformation has bumps. It's going to require that you fail sometimes and that you learn from that failure, and that has to be an environment that supports that. Because if it isn't, then people won't take the risk at the end of the day. Okay, how it works. So let me talk about this from a pivotal standpoint. And because today, so far, I really haven't mentioned technology that much, and technology is absolutely at the foundation. But again, it's not the only thing that we feel is going to enable a successful transformation. So for us, transformation starts with the foundation, which is our Pivotal Cloud Foundry product. And it enables, really development and deployment of software in an innovative, flexible way, longer term. But on top of that foundation, we also think you have to develop the practices that enable you to develop and deploy software differently. And for us, those practices involve, immersing engineering, design, product management teams with our folks and co-working together on a series of projects and products, and then enabling those people to take those practices back within a broader organization. Now that, in and of itself, is a statement that sounds way simpler than it is taking something back. And that's really where the practice that I'm part of here at Pivotal, the enterprise transformation practice, gets involved. Because what can happen a lot is you're like, we're functioning and it's super awesome within this, this square, and this circle, and we're doing really, really well. And now we go back to the mothership, and the mothership has this whole set of structures and culture and policies and things that aren't aligned with the way that we've been working. And so all of a sudden you go back and it's like all these things can overwhelm what you've tried to accomplish. And it can actually happen very quickly. In a lot of cases. So it's, how do we work to say, let's take these new things that have been developed and move them back and start to address some of these supporting and touch points that are really going to make or break whether or not this can be sustainable over time. The other thing I want to say is that transformation, it's not, sometimes there can be real purist mentalities about things that, you're not transforming if you don't look exactly like this. If you don't look exactly like an office that is ours, or you don't, function 100% the way we do, that's not transformation. And that's not the case. Every organization starts in a different place, right? Relative to, what their drivers are for transformation, relative to their culture, their ability to take something like this on. There may be pieces of the puzzle that have already started happening. And so everybody starts in a different place, and the endpoint looks different for everyone. So it's important to realize that transformation is a journey, and it may be that I start here and I do these few things, and then that enables me to get to the next place. But that doesn't mean failure just because I don't look like, a certain defined end state, right? So I'll use an example. Moving from a project focus to a product focus is a very big component of an agile transformation. And a number of the clients that we've worked with, I've seen this sort of, I wouldn't call it a baby step, but it's an interim step where we say, we've got project managers, we've got this huge PMO, so we're going to now say, okay, our PMO is a series of project managers, and then we're going to move them to product managers. Or we're going to take business analysts and we're going to move them to product managers. Great. And they're going to start, instead of doing requirements, they're going to start doing user stories. But then we're really not going to co-locate them because we have all these things that are getting in the way of us being able to do that. So we're going to, we're still going to take those user stories and we're going to kind of throw them over the wall. And then we're going to do Agile within that context, and then we'll talk again. So it's a start down the path. It definitely has, there are things that are going to be realized from that in terms of benefit, but there are also limitations in terms of how far you can go with that too, but it's a start down the path. And sometimes for an enterprise, being able to move from, again, I've got a 400-person project management organization, and that's the way that I have managed projects and done work, and now I need to think about how I move to making a product focus. Sometimes you have to take those steps, and it's a multi-year journey to get there. So I want to make that point because I think sometimes we can be very black or white about if it's not that, it's not transformation, you've not been successful, it's not that. It's a journey. And identifying those blockers and obstacles and really opportunities, which I mentioned earlier, are an important thing to do as part of really a discovery process when you start down the path to an enterprise transformation. So if we talk a little bit about that on the next page. So from an approach standpoint, there's just a few things that I want to mention that I think we believe are super important to enabling a transformation. So I talked earlier about a cross-functional group, and we think that you need cross-functional leadership at an executive level, but you also need cross-functional change agents who are day in and day out driving the change, right? because they're the ones who are going to model the behavior. They're the ones who are going to communicate back within their organizations. Hey, this is different. This is how we're working. This is how we're going to accomplish something. And they're the ones who are going to be, that people are going to go ask the real questions of. Because most folks aren't going to probably, roll up to the CEO and go, that discussion you said the other day, I don't like that idea. I don't think it makes sense, right? But they're going to go ask, the person in their organization who is actually, being participating in one of these agile teams or whatever, and they're going to say, hey, okay, give me the real truth about pairing. Like, it sounds super painful. What does it really look like? How do you experience it? So I think that is a really important thing. And as part of that, that group needs to be clear on what the goals are and what the metrics are, which has got to be like one of the most boring things to talk about, right? To have to stand up here and go, oh, you need metrics. Like, sounds super old school and boring. And it is, but how else do you know what success looks like? How do you know where to pack or what to pack if you don't know where you're going? So those things really, really need to be done at the beginning of a transformation. And they're your guides. It doesn't mean you don't change or you don't modify and you don't improve those as you go along, but you need that stake in the ground. And you do need to do some discovery work around, really where are the obstacles? What are those things that are going to get you? So another example may be governance processes. So take your pick, ARBs, IRBs, whatever the RBs are that you end up having at big enterprises, architecture review boards, infrastructure review boards, all these different kinds of things, many of which come up from, again, a very waterfall way of working. And so how do we need to look at those things? So understanding how you run into those obstacles and then prioritizing, which ones are really going to make the biggest change if you start to impact and to change the processes and the mindsets and the ways of interacting around those. The other major piece, and we've talked a little bit about it as we've gone, but we really believe in iterate and learn. It's a very fundamental part of the process, and it isn't just only, from a software development standpoint. It's also as you think about, as we're going to change roles, as we're going to look at how do we do funding and align it in a way that supports agile processes. So let's try something. Let's try it and figure it out. It may not work. It may work, and that's okay. But let's learn and try it and keep moving and keep iterating around, because ultimately that's how you're going to learn what's going to work and what isn't in your organization. And then it's about scale. So if you've gotten to a certain point where you're not going to know everything, because you're never going to say, I'm 100% certain I've got it all figured out and let's go, right? You get to a point though where you say, we've taken this circle and we've started to move it out a little bit and we're feeling pretty good that we understand some of the big things that we're going to run into, and we've got approaches for how to think about and run into how to start to address some of these obstacles. So then you actually need to start to scale. And you say, let's feel good enough. Let's go pick another organization. Let's go pick another product team. Let's go look at how we can start to move this more broadly within the company. So that ultimately is also an ongoing learning and iterating process. It doesn't just, it's not just a plan that you turn around and go, we're done, victory. It's an ongoing piece. So I'm guessing most of you have seen an adoption curve a couple of times in your life, probably. Technology, product, et cetera, et cetera. Well, newsflash, it's really not that much different for transformation. There's still, it holds very true in terms of the way that people approach transformation. You've got, the folks who are going to be right there day one because they're innovators, they want to be part of it, they're super excited. Moving to your early adopters, your early majority, late majority, et cetera. So it holds very true for what we've seen for large-scale enterprise transformation as well. The squiggly, I'll try not to fall off the stage because that would probably be bad, but the orange line that you see is purposefully very squiggly. And the reason it is because up and to the right is a straight line. Sorry to tell you, but that's not how transformations go. They have ups, they have downs, they have learnings, they have opportunities, and ultimately that's what that line looks like over time until you do get to, we've got a high percentage of adopters. It's 100%. Sometimes your laggards come kicking and screaming because they don't have any other choice at that point if they still want to be part of the organization, but they ultimately, they get there. And so, it's really important to, lay that groundwork as we were talking about earlier and understanding what those goals are, communicating those, storytelling, starting to try things, learn. And I should mention as part of that trying and learning, it's super important to communicate successes and to also communicate learnings, right? Because it isn't always a sunny path, and if you're going to be authentic, you need to be able to talk about both and to communicate those all along the way. And that's ultimately how you're going to reach the broader masses and how you're going to actually start to then get to where people are demanding and asking you to be involved, as opposed to you're going, come on, please participate in this, can I get you on this team, that kind of thing, right? So that's where you start to see that shift. A couple of major risk points that we also see in transformation, and one I've talked a lot about, it's if you don't have that executive or cross-functional support. If you're trying to do something in a very narrow manner, it's not that you won't see some success, because you absolutely will in that context, but if you're really trying to do broader enterprise transformation, you've got to have that cross-functional involvement. And from a pivotal standpoint, the second major risk we see is, again, where we've co-located and we've got teams that are working with us and we're developing software in a certain way, and everybody's reaching an approach to working and they're on the same page. And then we say, okay, now it's time where we're going to actually move all of that back to the client site. That's another place where there's a major risk if we haven't started to address those touch points. Again, the culture and the organization can very quickly overwhelm that success. So just a few things that we talk about when we meet with people who are looking to undertake an enterprise transformation, and I'll sound a little bit redundant, but that's for a reason, because these are super important. So goals, business model implications, so it is going to have an impact financially. It's going to have an impact to the way you work, and so you need to be able to phase that in and think about how that happens over time. So, because there's obviously investment on the front end that has to happen for some of these things. Leadership commitment, and that isn't the infamous, drive-bys. I come by and you need me to talk to somebody for 5 minutes? Here you go. Here's the 5 minutes at that lunch and learn or whatever, and now I'm gone for another 2 months, right? It has to be engagement. Cross-functional funding, it costs money to do this stuff. It costs money, it takes the right resources. One of the other challenges that I've seen with a client that I was with at a couple of weeks ago when we were chatting, and they had a cross-functional team that they had started, and we started talking about all the different work they were doing. They had a huge list of things. And so I was trying to get an assessment about, what do you think is going to have the biggest impact, and how are you spending your time? And then what came out was, well, actually I do my day job for 40 hours a week, and then I do this stuff, if I have time, for an hour or two around the edges. And you're not going to actually change a company if you approach it that way. On the front end, people have to be able to dedicate a portion of their time. And over time, those two merge together, right? So at the beginning, I've got, my day job, and I've got, a portion of my time that I'm dedicating to really enabling this transformation. And over time, they become the same thing, because your day job is working in that way, but that takes time. And if you don't make that commitment on the front end, it's not going to happen. Cloud Foundry, a platform, and then executive storytelling is the other really important thing, we think. So for us, the last couple things I want to mention is we actually believe it's not just the what, it's the how you do stuff. And we really believe that you need to have an enablement focus, that you need to be practical, as I mentioned earlier, not purist about things, have a lot of empathy through this process, because again, back to what I asked you guys to do at the beginning, and to change seats and to move around, change is stressful. It's very stressful. And if you don't have empathy, it's going to be very difficult to bring people along that journey. And also, experiential learning yields the best results. I can tell you about it, but if you do it and you participate in doing it with me, that's going to yield a much better result than if I just hand you a PowerPoint. And one other thing that we're big believers in here at Pivotal, and that we're really doing is creating a community around transformation. And we're finding a humongous appetite for this, really, both at sort of an executive level for executive sponsors and champions who are wanting to take this on. They want to be able to share with each other what they're doing and what's working and what isn't, and how they approached a particular problem, and also very much throughout an organization at the grassroots level as well. So I want to be able to talk to somebody else in HR at another company when they had to change from project management to product management, when their architects all of a sudden were used to being part of a centralized kind of command and control architecture organization, and they were more dispersed and working directly with teams. It's a different approach. So how did you do that? What worked? What were the issues that people ran into? So we're really trying to foster a lot of those conversations with a lot of different people, so that because ultimately we believe that that's just going to accelerate progress for everyone, as opposed to I have my way of doing it and I don't want to talk about it. So anyway, so thank you all very much. Are there questions that I can answer for anybody, or? how do you align these very waterfall, often year-long type approaches to funding with an agile approach, which by definition asks you to learn and to adapt and to iterate within that context. So it's a great question. I will tell you, we run into that at every single client. And I don't know that there's a magic wand that says this is exactly the way to do it. And it's particularly challenging when you're dealing with public companies, because they have a budgeting process that is aligned with how they actually communicate results to the street as well. But some of the ways that we've started down the path, so I actually worked on a large insurance transformation project for a regional insurance carrier a couple of years ago. And we were doing a very large scale initiative using Agile. And so of course people were not, it was in the $300 million kind of range, so people weren't going to be okay with not having some approach to financial management. But what we did was we started down the path, so this wasn't purely aligned with Agile, but we started down the path by saying, okay, you know what, let's chunk out money at a quarterly level and say, okay, here's a chunk of money. You come in and you tell me that the outputs that you're going to achieve for that money at a high level. So not at a super granular, this is exactly, I'm going to do feature 1 and feature 2, but from a customer lens, these are the outputs that we're looking to get to. And then we had the ability within that context to change those. To be able to say, okay, because as we did more research, we realized that the customer didn't need that as much as they needed this, or because of the development approach or complexity, or because of what the design team told us, we needed to switch to this, and we had the flexibility to make those decisions. So it was more the intent at a quarterly level, and then they gave us the flexibility within that context to be able to make those changes. And then we would report out each quarter, here's what we accomplished, and because we were doing it in a very output, value-based, you could really tell from a customer lens what we were doing and the changes we were making. They were very amenable to that. So we got rid of all the sort of stage gates that happened from a kind of a waterfall lens, and we started to put in place that. And again, we were talking about very large dollars here. So was it purely aligned? No. Did it give them purely aligned to how you would do agile budgeting? No. Did it give them the visibility that they needed to be able to feel like they had some control over how this large chunk of money was being spent, but still gave the team flexibility to make good decisions for what was right for the customer? So that's an example of how you can kind of start down that path. We actually ultimately ended up, after a couple of iterations through that, they said, you know what, you guys know what you're doing, so we definitely still have to have estimates for high-level things so we can put them into the budget, but we're going to leave it to your executive sponsor to manage that, and we're not going to be involved with that at all anymore. So he actually, and we worked with him, and he was the COO of the company, and talked about this is what we're going to accomplish, and or these are the trade-offs we need to make because of these reasons, and he said, great, go do it. So it's a start down the path, and as I said, there's no kind of super magic wand when you come to enterprises. That's much easier to accomplish when you're with smaller companies. Is there ever too much change? Do you get to a point where you wear people out? And I think the point at which you wear people out is when they don't see the impact in a positive way. So I'll go again to an example of this retail firm that we're working with. And when we first came in, and they had started wonderfully so. They had said, this is the vision we have, this is the path we're going to go down. And then because they were a very command and control culture, everybody started doing stuff immediately because they wanted to be seen as being active and visible and doing things. So there was this huge list of things that were going on. And the concern that immediately I had was that's just going to feel like way too much change for people because they don't understand how those tie to the vision and they don't start to see the impact. So I think at the end of the day, it's that sort of gut sense and of, are we impacting the right things to get to the vision in a way that people can assimilate and they can actually, take in. Because if you throw too much at folks, then you're going to not see the impact. You're going to stop seeing results because they just can't absorb and take it anymore. And it'd be better than to do less and to accomplish something that's real versus try to do everything and kind of do it half-baked, and then you end up without good results. So I absolutely believe there can be too much, and you need to be thoughtful about how you plan that, and you need to, and it's probably something else I should have said as we were walking through the presentation, you need to have feedback loops. You really have to have them consistently as you're doing transformation. So you're getting the input from people about, oh, that didn't work, that worked, I don't feel good about this, this whole organization is freaked out beyond belief over here. So you need to have those built into the process so that you can get that lens of, okay, that's too much, we need to back off in this area. From a pivotal standpoint, I would say no, only because we're new to doing some of these. So I wouldn't give that because we're so great and so cool. So, but I have seen them fail in my past lives, and they almost always failed because they really didn't have engagement in a cross-functional manner, because there were a set of people who just didn't want to get on board, and because they had, without having strong leadership that could help them get on board, they just dug their heels in and wouldn't do it. Just said, we're not going to do it. Well, and a common thing that you hear is, you know what, I've seen 5 versions of this, I'll just wait you out too, because I've been here for a long time and I'll be here after you're gone. So it's really about, overcoming that. And this, again, I started with the people, and I'm a broken record, but it's all about the people, because they are going to make or break a transformation. You need all the other elements in place, not bypassing or blowing those off, but it's about the people. So if you don't have that, leadership and engagement, so that you can, thinking back again to that adoption curve, so that you can bring people along, then you're going to end up in that place where you'll have the early adopters and maybe a few more, and then it's just going to die. Are there a set of things that you look for to know whether or not your organization is ready for a transformation? So truthfully, a lot of organizations, you may never be exactly ready. Sometimes you just need to start. But there are a set of things, and it's actually, a lot of them are on this page that I just talked about here. But at an individual level, one of the things that we talk to people about when they put together this group of change agents is getting people who have a certain set of mindsets and really skills from more of a cultural and influence standpoint that can participate. And I think these people can be the key people that can also give you feedback on, are you ready and where do you need to spend more time? So some of the characteristics that we really look for in that group of change agents: influence is probably the number one. And influence isn't dictated by my name is in this particular box in an org chart. It's by my ability to influence both my boss, the people who work for me, and horizontally, my peers across different organizations, because they respect what I say, they respect my approach and my ability to be real about things. So influence is a really big thing. Also the willingness and ability to learn. So you don't have to, and we frequently talk about, we'll see, when we're trying to develop these change agents, people will nominate folks who are, well, you get, actually, in fairness, you get a couple of different lenses. You get people who, at a leadership level, if they're not built in or really bought in, they'll nominate their people that they feel like they can afford to not have working on their day jobs, which are not the people that you usually want, right? Or they'll nominate people that they think are, experts in Agile. And at the end of the day, you want people who are willing and able to learn, and that's their mentality for how they work every day is, I want to learn more. And because they can learn, the principles and the practices of Agile, they just have to have that mindset to want to learn. And the other key thing is really about having a team mentality. So I'm not only focused on what's it doing for my career, I'm focused on how can I enable my team and how can I enable my organization. And if you get that set of people who are ultimately your change agents, they give you a lot of the signals about where you're going to have trouble within your organization. But at a high level, it's really the things about, do you have your leadership on board and aligned? Are you willing to dedicate the resources and to make the hard calls to make something like this happen? Are you committed to spending the time, to telling the stories, to solving the issues, to, chatting with people that you feel like you've told them, 55 times why this is important and they're still not getting it? Are you still willing to commit that time? Do you always need Pivotal or another company? I would say, to help you, execute on a transformation. You don't. I think it really depends upon the ability of a company to be self-aware, right? So, and that's probably no different than us as an individual. Like, do I need a trainer that's going to actually help me do things? Because I think I'm working out super hard, and then the minute I work with a trainer and he goes, oh my gosh, you're totally not. Your heart rate has been 100 the entire time. You're not doing anything. So I think a lot of it is about that self-awareness of a company. Do you have that ability to know? Because sometimes an external party can be that voice of, you're not really doing this the way you think you're doing this. And if you want to make this change, here's the hard news I need to give you. I think it's a combo platter, to be truth. I think that your board certainly, or your executive team can play a role in that, and should. If they're doing their jobs, they should be. But I also think that there are people within the organization, and it's kind of a level of detail question too. The board may see it at this level, but then there may be people who are saying, you know what, I know about a different way to do these things, but I'm not getting heard. So how do you bubble that up? So I think that it's really at all levels that you need to have that. And some companies can do that. Some companies are very self-aware. They realize before, it's usually smaller companies, in fairness, it is, because they don't have careers that are as institutionalized into the current processes as do larger organizations, but can be very self-aware and can be, we're not even necessarily seeing a sign of a problem yet, but we know if we don't start doing these things and start transforming, it's going to hit us. So I think that in those cases it can be successful, but sometimes having an outside perspective, it doesn't even have to be a company, it could be an individual, or someone else who can come in and say, hey, let's take another look at that. You may not be thinking about that quite the way that you think you are. And here's also a perspective on the other 10 different companies that I've worked with and how they approached it or how they thought about it. I don't know if their personalities change so much as I would say their willingness to try different things, because I think sometimes people are very interested in, and they kind of think, ooh, that looks interesting, but I don't know if I can really go try or do that because I think I might actually get in trouble or something within my organization if I do that. And so I'll again give an example of a client meeting that I was in just a couple of weeks ago, where it was a great session because it was people were being very open and honest, and we were talking about whether or not fear was an issue in terms of making progress. And this one woman said, she goes, it's complete and utter humiliation. She said, if I screw something up, I will be unbelievably humiliated within my group. And I was like, my heart just went, oh, but that's the reality in a lot of places. So I think one of the biggest changes I see is that when you go to create much more of a learning organization where it's like, of course, we're not going to tolerate you doing like stupid things all day long every single day, but we are going to definitely tolerate you learning and realize that learning means you don't do everything right. And I think then you see people start to feel more confident, and then they start to actually think, how can I take these smart risks? And that leads to like really great output. So that's mostly what we really start to see, is people sort of bloom a little bit in that context, and to kind of feel their own worth and to feel like, wow, I can actually really change and do some of these things and make these calls, and you know what, maybe one of them doesn't go well and I'm not going to get crucified for that, it's all good, I'm going to keep trying. I think that's one of the biggest changes we see. When you're working with a large client, a large enterprise, and they're in the throes of trying to go through all what can be often very painful in terms of some of the transformation, what's the reason for doing it? What's the really focus? What got them going? And it varies by the client. I'll give you an example of the insurance company. Insurance is a business that has really not been reinvented for a very long period of time. And it's not always, I think probably everybody in the room is a customer of an insurance company, right? And in many cases, it hasn't always historically been the most customer friendly. It's like, you need to have insurance, and this is the way that we're going to provide it with you. And we all grew through merger and acquisition, so we've got a mess on the back end, and it will be exposed to you at times that you actually don't want to enjoy it. So for them, the driver was really realizing that we can't be that way anymore, because a lot of things are changing within the industry and the regulatory environment that are allowing new entrants to come in very quickly. And so, for instance, Google is now starting to move into the insurance space. You have a lot of, if you're talking about cars, you have a lot of providers that do usage-based insurance for autos. So I drive this far, and because I only drive this far, I only pay you this much, versus I will pay you this much every month for the rest of your life, which was the previous model. So all these things are really starting to drive change in insurance, and they realize that if they're going to be competitive in that market, that they need to think about customers in a very different way. And they need to think about how they engage with customers and how they develop and deploy software in a way that supports that model that they absolutely cannot do right now, because it takes them years to be able to turn things around from a software standpoint. So that was really what kept them in mind, and ultimately, I would say it's sort of about survival, but in a very, it's not like an immediate thing. They're not going to go out of business tomorrow, but they're realizing that their market share is eroding more and more if they don't start down the path. So it's usually drivers like that we're seeing that that are, the technology and a lot of the things that are available in the market are really shifting the way that companies interact with customers very, very quickly, and new entrants to the market all the time. Is it a problem because most companies are reacting to competitors as opposed to thinking proactively? Yeah, I mean, it is a problem, but it's also a reality because so many of these big enterprises, another client that I worked with in a past life, was a 100-year-old brand, super well-known, brand, had a business model that had been, very, very successful for many, many years, and just didn't pay attention to the fact that all these other people were now actually attaching a core part of their service to, like, their credit card, or to when you buy a new car or something, they were doing all these things, and woke up and went, oh, like, we need to do something, but it was already kind of too late for them, in a sense, So, but I will tell you, it's very difficult to find companies that are able to think that, to be that forward-thinking. Particularly in the enterprise space, again, because they've got so many things that are keeping them in the place that they're in today. You definitely see that in smaller and startups or in mid-markets, and ideally you would get people to start having that as more of a common part of their planning process, but it's not where a lot of, whoops, losing my microphone here, it's not a lot of where people are at right now. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very, very much for your attendance. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed Tech Week. Thank you.